State media is reporting that Iranian police are resuming controversial patrols to ensure women obey dress codes and cover their hair in public. The morality police are set to return to the streets 10 months after Mahsa Amini died in custody following her arrest in Tehran for allegedly breaking that dress code. Her death triggered massive national protests and the patrols were paused. However, Islamic hardliners have been demanding that the patrols be resumed for some time now. Under Iranian law, which is based on the country's interpretation of Islamic Sharia law, women must cover their hair with a hijab or headscarf and wear loose, long-fitting clothing to disguise their figures. The morality police unit is tasked with ensuring those rules are respected and detaining people who are perceived to be improperly dressed. If the women disobey orders, police may also then opt for legal action. And with me in studio now to break this down is I24 News correspondent Pierre Stechelbach. Pierre, in the months following the protests, we've seen many videos, namely on social media, of women in Iran stopping to wear hijabs completely.
Right, but yeah, we definitely have seen those videos coming out, especially also in the past couple of months, of women walking in the streets of major cities of Iran, including the capital Tehran, without hijabs. Women also in some cases dancing, men showing solidarity with them. But of course, now it has been yesterday announced by the spokesperson for the enforcement of law that police patrols, whether be it on foot or in vehicles, will crack down now on people not complying with those very strict modesty laws in the Islamic Republic. And of course, that will target women in the first place concerning the hijab, but also for men there are quite some laws in place. For example, men having to wear long pants. We've also seen quite some actions of opposition by men coming out on the streets in shorts, for example, to show that solidarity. And I think we really need to go back in time a little bit. It is now 10 months ago that Mahsa Amini died. She was a young Kurdish woman, only 22 years old, who died in police custody after not wearing her hijab properly. That is, of course, according to the Islamic modesty laws in place in Iran. And since then, 7 people were in fact sentenced to death and also executed, 7 people who were connected to the protests, hundreds of course arrested, and we've seen these massive waves of protests after her death all throughout the country, many times happening in front of universities. Those protests have died down, but they were kind of replaced by those act of civil disobedience of not wearing a hijab in public, or men wearing shorts in public. But of course, these protests were not triggering a change in law. Those were triggering a more tolerant stance of the Islamic Republic of letting these things happening without violently cracking down on, for example, every woman who goes out with without a hijab. But in fact, this was not a legal stance or a change in legal stance. That was a new form of tolerance that was also fought by, for example, single acts of law enforcement by, for example, the Islamic law enforcement publishing a video only a couple of days ago where police forces were walking around with cameras. Those cameras were filming in women's faces, women who were not wearing hijab. That video was published to kind of create a climate of intimidation, of course, to kind of get that image across that there is still law enforcement in place. There have also been, within the past week, 2 actors been arrested for. One of them, a woman, was showing up at a funeral for a friend of hers not wearing hijab. The other one was expressing his solidarity with women not wearing hijab on social media. And we've seen this also in connection to the protests, that it is often people or celebrities that have a kind of reach also via social media who are targeted first and foremost by law enforcement. But now that this has been announced by Iranian police that there will be a heavier crackdown on people not complying with the laws, it will be, I think, quite difficult to kind of roll back freedoms that people have already gained for themselves now.
And as you mentioned, this isn't necessarily a change to anything within the legal system, but more so just to allow some tolerance within the Iranian society. But Mahsa Amini, as you pointed out, was kept in detention, and she was being educated there for wearing her hijab incorrectly, not that she wasn't wearing one at all. And the Iranian regime is now saying that there's going to be stricter measures. We know that the reports that came out said that she was beaten. Are we expecting to see physical violence as part of these stricter measures, or possibly worse, the death penalty?
Well, that is something that, of course, people are fearing within Iran, and that is something that would not be unprecedented. Mahsa Amini, this is what her family says. This is what many of her supporters or the people who came out to the streets say, that she has been indeed beaten or killed by the Iranian regime. And as I mentioned, 7 people have indeed been executed for participating in these protests. So this is something very feasible that we might see. And we've already seen also the first sign of kind of opposition to that new announcement of increased law enforcement. Yesterday evening, after that announcement was made, reports came out of a large crowd gathering in the city of Rasht in northern Iran after 3 women were about to be detained. And when those news spread, people came out and kind of prevented the police forces from arresting these 3 women. So we also have to look into the possibility of new protests erupting. This is, of course, going to be an incredibly sensitive momentum now. If this is going to trigger a new wave of protests, if the Iranian police will indeed be able to go through with that increased law enforcement, it will be very interesting to see now the developments following in Iran.
And no doubt we'll have you in studio breaking down those developments as they come in. Correspondent Pierre Steckelbach, thank you very much for being with us here this morning.